So here it goes. This is the introduction. Since God is the creator of the universe and the creator of the laws that govern all the things seen and unseen, only God knows all the truth in the universe. Divine truth is God's absolute truth. As such, God's truth is infinite, logical, scientifically accurate, and the true reality of universal life. Humankind has over tens of thousands of years hungered and searched for absolute truth on a large variety of subjects. Usually this search has been through a process of experimentation, scientific or otherwise, with limited results. Since humans are not God and no one knew how to receive these truths from God, humankind has continued the process of experimentation in order to discover new truth. In the 1st century, I discovered the way to receive truth from the source of all truth, the Creator. This way was created by God and only needed someone to discover it through the exercise of their own will. I am Jesus of Nazareth. The way I discovered included experimentation, but also involved the essential ingredient of developing a direct relationship with God. Rather than sharing all the truth I discover with others, I focus on showing others the way in which they can also receive truth from God directly. My 1st century wife, Mary Magdalene, and I have come to earth for the 2nd time, along with another 12 people. I was named Alan John Miller by my parents in this life, and Mary has been named Mary Suzanne Luck. We have returned for many reasons, which include sharing the truths that we have learnt from God during our 2,000 years of existence on earth and in the spirit world. More importantly, we wish to share the method or way that God created whereby humans can learn God's truth and receive God's love. The teachings in this book are a collection of material that we have presented to and discussed with others for over 2,000 years. These teachings describe the way that we can infinitely grow in all of the qualities that God has, such as love, truth, happiness, wisdom and power, and the way in which we can remove from ourselves any quality that God does not have, such as sadness, fear, unhappiness, pain and suffering. Our personal infinite growth in God's qualities and infinite growth in the development of our own soul, our individuality and personality and character, is only possible by engaging this way to God. Absolute truth is all-encompassing. It describes the nature of the physical, spiritual and soul-based universes and dimensions, the structure of these universes, and the loving laws that govern them. It also describes the nature of the human, the physical body, the spiritual form, and the completed soul, and how the human soul operates and controls the physical and spiritual forms, along with every aspect surrounding the development and progression of the human soul and how it interacts with its environment. It describes the created state of the soul and also the full potential of future states and how the human soul can grow infinitely and become completed in love. It demonstrates how the human can become at one with God in love, a state where all of our feelings and beliefs surrounding love will automatically be in harmony with God's love, where we will automatically act in harmony with God's love without needing to try, and where we will only ever experience joyful and pleasurable emotions, just as God does. Following God's way will affect every area of your life, just as it has impacted upon every area of my own life. It will involve a growing, ever-changing, loving personal relationship with God, with yourself, with your soulmate, your children, with your friends and acquaintances, with people who have passed into other dimensions, with your environment, with the universe, and even with those whom you now see as your enemies. It will demonstrate to you that if you receive God's love, everything else will be added to you. I can assure the reader that everything I've written about in this book is true. I'm not making up stories, presenting theories as facts, nor am I just hoping that what I'm teaching is true. Rather, all of the things I present here I have discovered through my own personal experience, and I suggest to you that no matter who you are, you can do the same. God's truth can only be fully understood through a personal experience between oneself and God, which will be emotional and life-changing. It cannot be fully understood with the intellect, since intellectual development has limitations, whereas emotional experience has no limit. This book is a means to provide an overview of God's truth, but a personal relationship with God will be necessary and essential in order for the material in this book to be truly comprehended. In addition, it is essential that the reader does not assume that this book, or any other book for that matter, can describe all of God's truth. This book is an introduction to the infinite truth that is available for each of us to receive from God about ourselves and every subject within the universe, should we choose to engage a personal relationship with our Creator. God's truth is infinite in nature, and although simple to obtain, is complex in its implementation. So humankind will continue to discover more of it throughout eternity without ever knowing divine truth in its entirety. Only God will ever know all of God's truth. God is divine, and absolute truth is divine truth. So that's the introduction. I won't read much more now because I think it'll bore you maybe. But then I go on to discussing God and my personal experience with God and so forth, and we go through many of the other things about the human soul and what happens to the human soul and so forth. So hopefully it will give people a good understanding and grasp of the principles of divine truth from an intellectual perspective, and it'll be a great first book to read. That's what our goal is, to actually make it an engaging and quite powerful first book to read emotionally. So when I discuss issues about God, for example, I'll read you a bit of that as we go through our seminar over this weekend, and you can tell me and give me some feedback. That'll be good as well. Is there any comments you'd like to make about it? Barbara, you'd like to? Who's got our mics today? Thank you, and thank you.
Only when you were reading that out, I was getting visions of laying back in an armchair with children around and reading that book to them.
Yeah.
As instead of nighttime storybooks, that would be the book in the home to read in the future. And I thought it was very beautiful.
Yeah, well, I'm hoping that it will be quite a personal book as well. I've started it out being quite personal, as you'll find in the section about God. And the reason why I would like that is because I want sort of to take people on the journey of the discovery of the truths that I've been presenting to you. The problem with these presentations and any seminar that I give is that I can't really take you on the journey. The only thing I can do is present a whole series of truths to you, and then you decide whether or not you want to go on the journey or not with God, right? And that's so what I'm trying to achieve with the book is try to help people go on this journey with me so that I can describe the journey and people can come to see what kind of journey they will probably need to engage if they're really, truly going to have a relationship with God. The reason why I raise that actually is because there are some fundamental questions that each of us must face with regard to our relationship with God. And yet many of us ignore these fundamental questions. So to give you an example, does God exist? That's a fundamental question. It's pointless trying to have a relationship with a God that doesn't exist. If there is no God that exists, then why try to have a relationship with God? It would be just like a figment of our imagination. So one of the very first things that we should determine in our progression is whether God exists or not. Does that make sense? And my feelings are, if we haven't personally done that yet, you can't hope to receive divine love without doing it. So we need to start at that place. And then the second place I would look at is, what are God's qualities? What are God's fundamental attributes and qualities? Like, who wants to connect to a God who's like the Bible God? You know, the one who's going to come and destroy all the wicked, and you don't really know whether you're wicked or righteous because sometimes the rules seem to change for each person. And is that the kind of God you want to connect to? So for a lot of people, This is why they don't have a really good relationship with God, is because they do believe in a God that has qualities that are very human. In other words, they believe in a God that has anger and rage and wrath and desire for punishment and resentment. These are all things the Bible does say God is, but is God really like that? Right? Now, unless you have a way of determining whether God is like that, it's highly unlikely you'll have a relationship with God. And so this is one of the things that I've described in the book, of how I went through the process of having this awareness come to me through the experience, rather than just talking about God's qualities and not addressing the emotional reasons why we can't accept these particular qualities as God's qualities. So I'll read you the first few paragraphs of my section about God. Societies, religions and individuals across the world have created a wide variety of theories about who or what God is. These theories include, but are not limited to, God is an entity, God is an energy force, God is the universe, God is nature, God is the quality of love, God is an alien life form, God is just a life form with more knowledge than humans, God is a creation of human imagination. We are all God. We are all fragments of God, or God does not exist at all in any manner or form. Now, isn't that how it is most of the time? Many believe that it's impossible to know any real answers about God anyway, so it is a waste of valuable time, effort, and resources trying. Those who believe in God of some kind have also created a wide variety of theories about God's nature, character, and attributes. These theories include, but are not limited to, God is love, God is punishing, God is angry, wrathful, or even enraged, God does not care, God does care, God is a trinity of being, God is Jesus, God is narcissistic, God has a name, God holds grudges, God is forgiving, God is powerful, wise and loving and kind. Many of these assumptions, besides being contradictory, do not come from personal experience or reference to reality, but rather from using thoughts that people often call logic, but which I would argue often contain a complete lack of logic. The sad part of human history is that people are also willing to commit violent acts and even go to war for the sake of protecting such theories about God. Throughout the last 2,000 years, the religious justification of violence has been a major cause of pain and suffering on this planet. It has been my personal experience that the God we believe in is also the type of person we eventually become. We model our own behaviour on how we believe God would behave. So this is a problem with our issues with God. Now, again, can you see, we could keep going, couldn't we? We could keep writing off a whole heap of beliefs about God that are still within us. These beliefs are still within us. After 5.5 years of hearing about, and maybe even longer for many of you, because you would have heard other people talk about it, that God is a God of love, we still believe these things. Now, how can we ever hope to have a changed life while we continue having faith in these errors? We can't, can we? You see, what happens, and what I've noticed happening for many of you, is that you continue to justify to yourself your errors. You continue to have faith in them. The problem with having faith in an error is that nothing in your life will ever change for the better. Because errors are all not facts. They are false. Right? And it's only our fear that causes us to retain such justifications. It's only our unwillingness to feel fear. And what's our unwillingness to feel any emotion? What's that called? A lack of humility. You see, if we had real faith, can you see it would help us even have humility if we had real faith? if we had real faith that actually God's not like that, right? That God's a different being than what we've been taught. If we had faith in that, then we would shift from our current perspective, and we would at least even have some desire to feel our reasons why we believe God is like this. But until we work our way through those particular issues, we are not going to shift on our relationship with God. Do you want to pray? Do you want to long for something from someone who doesn't exist? I don't know about you, but I wouldn't bother with that. Right? Do you want to long for love from somebody who is manipulative, controlling, and punishing? According to the Bible, God's a genocidal maniac who murdered. Some people have actually done some calculations, and I think the actual record of the numbers of people that God killed in the Bible add up to over 2 million. And that doesn't include the flood of Noah's day, and it doesn't include the coming Armageddon that, according to the Bible, is coming. If you added the flood of Noah's day, which says that everybody died except for 7 people, and you had Armageddon, which says that everybody who's wicked on this planet currently will also die, now we're up into the billions that God's going to kill, or God has killed. Now, you and I, nowadays, if some fellow who got into power did that, what would we call him? Well, what did you call Hitler or Stalin? And they've only killed Stalin 20 million. Hitler, at worst possible estimates, about 12 or 13 million directly responsible for. And God's killed billions. Do you want to have a relationship with that God? I don't think I would want one if God turned out to be like that. This issue, there's something wrong with me. Right from the beginning, I've shared with you the real Lord's Prayer, the prayer that I shared with the disciples in the first century. And I said to you that the very first part of the prayer reads like this. I'll read it to you, actually, because this is something that the majority of us still haven't accepted. We don't have faith in. I'll just find where I've got the prayer. Got it anyway. Oh, here it is. My Father is in heaven. I recognize that you are all holy and loving and merciful, and that I am your child and not the subservient, sinful and depraved creature that false teachers would have me believe. Very first line of the prayer, I recognise that you're all holy and loving and merciful. There goes unforgivable, right? There's something wrong with me because you've been that God's manipulative, controlling and punishing. And then there's and that I am not the subservient, sinful and depraved creature. Well, there's something wrong with me gone. And there's God's not that good gone. And there's God's too busy gone. Like a lot of what's been listed there goes if we really had faith in that prayer. The fact is that the majority has no faith in that prayer. It's the very basis of your receiving love, and you've got no faith in the prayer. Because you've got no faith in the God that you're praying to. Now, can you see, again, it's our faith in our fear. Our fear has become such a God to us that we can't even have faith in something that's good anymore. The first point I'm raising is, does God exist? To me, this was the first fact I needed to establish before I attempted to discover anything else about God. The question as to whether God exists was so important to me that I spent the first 18 years of my life in the first century resolving this question. I felt then, and still feel, that it is pointless generating theories about God's nature when the basic fact of God's existence has not been established. During my life, I have found that God has been consistently demonstrating to me the facts surrounding the truth that God exists. The constant presence of intelligence in the world and the universe surrounding me provided supporting evidence. The complex multi-purpose design and symbiotic relationship between all living things gave further confirmation. The design of the human being and the human's capabilities to feel and love indicates supreme intelligence and care from a designer. I began with a single theory, and then I set out to establish for myself whether it was true or not. The theory was, if God exists, and God was the mastermind behind all of the creation I could see, then I am a child of God's creation. And if God loved, then surely God would want to share God's love with me and share all of his or her knowledge with me. That was my first theory. When I was very young, I decided that I would develop a desire to receive God's love and truth, and if I did actually receive it, I would then know whether God existed. So began my first experiment. What I found was this, that every time I sincerely had a feeling-based desire to receive love from God, that love would come into me from outside of me with such emotional force that I was overwhelmed emotionally and transformed by the experience every time. I called this sincere feeling-based longing and desire towards God prayer. I came to feel and think very differently to those surrounding me. I also found that each time this happened, I automatically understood more about the universe that I lived in. In other words, I found that I knew more absolute truth automatically. God, through this experience, convinced me of God's existence. Although I did not know when I began whether God existed, I now know the certainty of God's existence, not from supposition nor from inference, but rather from having this continuously growing personal relationship and experience with God. Thus came to me the fundamental truth: God exists. While undertaking my experiment with prayer, I discovered three more simple, fundamental, universally important, deeply moving and life-changing facts. Firstly, I found that each time I prayed, if I felt something about myself that I believed was true, but was not true from God's perspective, God's love would not come to me. I found through this experience that God was telling me the truth about myself, and I needed to develop the quality of humility in order to accept what God was telling me, rather than holding on to my own definition of myself. Secondly, and even more importantly, I found that each time I prayed, if I felt something about God that I believed was true, but was not true from God's perspective, God's love would not come to me. I found through this experience that God was telling me the truth about God. And if I was going to continue to receive God's love, I needed to accept what God was telling me about him or herself, rather than holding on to my own definition of God. See, many of you are still not giving up your own definitions of God, your own definitions of yourself. Thirdly, I found that each time I prayed, if I felt something about any subject whatsoever that I believed was true, but was not true from God's perspective, God's love would not come to me. I found through this experience that God was telling me the truth about the universe in which I lived. I needed to accept what God was telling me about the universe rather than holding on to my own definition of the universe. And if I did this, I would come to enjoy my own experience of the universe in a deeper and more fulfilling manner. I could also now see with overwhelming wonder how God communicated with me and informed me. It was not with a voice that I could hear, but through the feeling of love that I could feel. Thus I understood another fundamental truth. God communicates with all of God's children through the transmission of love. If I was close to love, either its expression or its reception, God could not communicate with me. In addition, every time I felt something out of harmony with God's absolute truth, I could not receive God's love, even if I thought I still had a feeling-based longing and desire to receive it. I knew that the love was there since I had previously felt it, but I just could not receive it in the moment. I could not feel it enter me. I realised that this is how most people live throughout all of their life, not feeling God's love enter them, not knowing what the truth is. I came to see that my own sincere feeling-based longing or desire for God's love, in harmony with God's truth about myself and the universe in which I lived, created an attraction between myself and God. And God, under those conditions, established a conduit between God and myself. And God's love then flowed through this conduit into me. I called this conduit that I eventually came to see with my own eyes, the Holy Spirit. So do you understand what I'm saying there about God's love? You see, if we're not open to love, and we're not open to either giving it or receiving it, then we can't communicate with God. Because the only way God communicates that I've discovered so far has been through the feeling of love. Right? You could call love the language of God. Now, love, I'm not suggesting to you love is a figment of somebody's imagination or anything like that. What I'm suggesting is it's a feeling that gets transmitted from God to you. And that feeling has certain characteristics and attributes. And one of the attributes is when you're out of harmony with truth, it can't be transmitted. It can't be received by you. It can't enter you. If you can understand the fundamental truth that God communicates not with a voice, but God communicates with the feeling of love, and that for you to actually ever be able to hear God, you're going to have to open yourself up to love, to firstly feeling love inside of yourself and expressing love out towards others from inside of yourself. In other words, open to the reception and transmission of love. Then it's impossible for you to have communication with God. You can hear words, but they'll only be words from spirits who might be either good or evil, you don't know. It's only when you can feel the feeling of love that you'll know whether they are even good or bad. So it's through this transmission of love. And without this transmission of love, like none of these qualities, the other qualities that I've mentioned there, can ever be developed. So what I feel personally is that if, in summary, is if we have any hope of developing in love in our future, if we are to have any hope to do that, we must recognise that faith in errors and using our will in harmony with the error is never going to lead us to love. Never. So the reality is you can have faith in things that completely harm and even potentially severely harm in a negative way, painful, with pain and suffering, your life. The reality is the majority of us on this planet are putting our faith in things that harm our lives. And we justify it. We hold on stubbornly to the opinion. And we refuse to open our heart to love. We refuse to open our heart to allow love in, and we refuse to open our heart to love others. And because God's language of communication is love, it's impossible for us to have a relationship with God.